The anime begins by showing the dark forest atmosphere at night as a young noblewoman named Charlotte Evans runs, fleeing from the pursuit of the guards. When the guards reach the depths of the forest where the Dark Lord resides, they decided not to continue the chase. Meanwhile, Charlotte kept running until she fell and lost consciousness. Shifting to a house in the middle of the forest, a misanthropic wizard named Alan Crawford is seen finishing his work. Due to his cruelty, Alan has earned the nickname the Dark Lord, feared by many people. The next day, Alan found Charlotte unconscious near his residence. Realizing that the girl was being targeted by the guards, Alan immediately fought off all the guards. The guards then threatened Alan to hand over Charlotte, but he refused. Alan eventually removed his hood, making the guards realize that he was the Dark Lord. All the guards immediately bowed, and Alan used his magic to erase the memories of all the guards before ordering them to leave. When Charlotte regained consciousness at Alan's residence, she worried that Alan wouldn't accept her in his house because her face had been spread everywhere as a fugitive across the entire kingdom. However, Alan tried to reassure Charlotte that he would help her hide from the pursuing guards. He even used his magic to compel Charlotte to stay in his house as a servant. Once she felt calmer, Charlotte explained that she had become a fugitive after the prince, who was her fiancé, accused her of a crime she had never committed. Everyone believed her fiancé's accusations, so Charlotte was hunted down to be imprisoned. Hearing this, Alan realized that Charlotte had most likely been framed so that her engagement could be annulled. Sometime later, Charlotte began working as a servant in Alan's house. Despite being a noblewoman, she seemed skilled at various household tasks, which greatly helped Alan. When Charlotte finished her chores, she appeared bored. So Alan asked about her hobbies to keep her occupied. Hearing Charlotte's confession that she had no hobbies, Alan intended to teach her about the joys of naughty living. After that, he examined records of various mischiefs that could be done, but unfortunately, Alan decided against it because the list of mischiefs seemed unsuitable for Charlotte. The next day, Charlotte asked Alan to give her more work. Hearing this, Alan felt admiration for Charlotte, but because she was working too hard, he asked Charlotte to take it easy. At the same time, a postwoman named Miacha Bastedos arrived to deliver some orders for Alan. To avoid trouble, Alan tried to hide Charlotte's identity from her. Unfortunately, since Charlotte's face had been published in the newspapers, Miacha recognized who Charlotte really was. Nevertheless, Miacha decided not to get involved in Charlotte's problems because she prioritized her client's comfort. At that time, Alan asked Charlotte to order something that Miacha could deliver later. Seeing Charlotte's confusion in choosing an item, Miacha suggested that she decline Alan's offer. Miacha even said that Charlotte could hit Alan if he continued to pressure her into doing something. Hearing Miacha's words, Alan got the idea to buy a punching bag that Charlotte could use to vent her anger. After the item arrived, Alan asked Charlotte to punch the bag while imagining she was hitting her ex-fiancé. Although Alan had put a picture of Charlotte's ex-fiancé on the punching bag, Charlotte admitted that she couldn't do it. Alan then tried to make Charlotte realize that she shouldn't hold back her emotions. Since Charlotte continued to refuse, Alan used his magic to compel her to throw a punch, which ended up hitting Alan in the face. Although Alan had to endure the pain from Charlotte's punch, the incident made Charlotte start to realize that she needed to be more honest with her desires and value herself. Unfortunately, when Alan offered her a drink, Charlotte still deferred the choice to Alan. So he deliberately gave her a medicinal potion so that Charlotte would choose the drink he had previously offered. In the middle of tea time, Alan's younger stepsister, Iruka Crawford, came to visit. Iruka was known as the daughter of the Crawford family who had adopted Alan. Although they grew up as step-siblings, Alan and Iruka were quite close, where Iruka didn't hesitate to tease Alan and Charlotte because she thought Charlotte was her stepbrother's girlfriend. Hearing this, Alan and Charlotte denied Iruka's assumption. Alan also explained that he was hiding Charlotte, who had escaped from the kingdom, and he planned to teach her how to enjoy life. After hearing this, Iruka enthusiastically told Charlotte about various things that girls usually do. Without thinking twice, Iruka then invited Charlotte to go for a walk in the city. Before leaving, Alan used his magic to change Charlotte's hair color and appearance so she wouldn't be recognized by the guards. Upon arriving at a clothing store, Charlotte tried on several outfits for her outing, including a sexy outfit that briefly mesmerized Alan. Feeling uncomfortable in the sexy outfit, Charlotte decided to try on something else. While waiting for Charlotte to change clothes, Iruka mentioned that she would investigate the kingdom where Charlotte came from, but Alan forbade his sister from doing so. Not long after, Charlotte came out wearing an outfit with an open back, revealing the scars from the torture she had endured. Seeing this, Alan changed his mind and decided to investigate why Charlotte had become a fugitive and to exact revenge on those who had treated her unfairly. At that moment, Alan asked for Iruka's help in conducting the investigation. After finding a suitable outfit for Charlotte, Alan planned to teach Charlotte how to have fun by buying whatever she wanted. Unfortunately, since most of the items Alan bought were useless, it annoyed Iruka, leading to an argument between the two siblings. A while later, Alan and the others continued their walk and arrived at an accessory shop where Alan bought a hair clip for Charlotte. Although it was inexpensive, Charlotte was happy to receive the hair clip from him. On their way home, several thugs suddenly blocked Alan and the others, trying to flirt with Charlotte by offering her more expensive accessories. Initially, Alan was reluctant to deal with the thugs, but after some of them crossed the line, Alan decided to teach the group of thugs a lesson. When their leader, a wizard named Magus, saw his men being beaten up, he finally confronted Alan. At that moment, Alan introduced himself as the Dark Lord, causing Magus, who had apparently known him previously, to immediately bow and beg for forgiveness. On another day, Iruka and Miacha visited Alan's house and were puzzled when they saw Alan frustrated because Charlotte wanted to walk around the city alone after he paid her for her work. Alan admitted that he was worried about Charlotte's safety because there were many thugs in the city. For Charlotte's safety, Iruka suggested that the three of them secretly follow and watch over her from a distance. Alan agreed with his sister's suggestion, so he and the others immediately followed Charlotte, who seemed to get lost and enter a dangerous area where criminals often gathered. Not wanting to disturb Charlotte, Alan chose to fight the criminals and forced them to be kind to Charlotte as she passed by. Because of this, when she walked through the dangerous area, all the criminals greeted her warmly, which made Charlotte feel puzzled. Nevertheless, Charlotte then gave medicinal potions to the criminals after noticing that they were injured. With Charlotte's kindness, the criminals bowed to her and promised to change their ways. The criminals even gave Charlotte the nickname Goddess, but after realizing that Alan was her master, they assumed that she had been threatened by Alan to work with him. According to the criminals, Charlotte did not deserve to live with the Dark Lord like Alan. At the same time, Alan, who heard the criminals' words, seemed annoyed, although he also realized that he was not suitable for someone as kind-hearted as Charlotte. Meanwhile, Charlotte immediately told the criminals that Alan was a good person because he had taught her how to be mischievous. Hearing this, the criminals, who initially admired Charlotte as a goddess, changed their minds and thought that she was not as good as they had believed. Shortly after Charlotte left the criminals, she continued her journey into increasingly dangerous areas, forcing Alan to beat up the thugs to keep them from harming her. Thanks to his actions, Charlotte was able to return to Alan's residence safely. At the same time, Alan made the city more peaceful after the thugs were beaten by him. That night, Alan told Charlotte about his plan to go on a vacation with her the next day and asked her where she wanted to go. Not wanting to trouble Alan, Charlotte didn't answer the question, but he insisted that she give him an answer. At that moment, Miacha arrived with prize tickets for a free trip to the Unoha region, so Alan finally decided to go on a vacation with Charlotte to that place. The next day, Alan and Charlotte departed for Unoha by horse-drawn carriage. During the journey, Charlotte expressed her happiness at being able to enjoy the beauty of the surrounding nature without the fear of being captured by guards. Alan, realizing that Charlotte was reminded of her bad memories of being a fugitive, tried to reassure her by saying that her wanted poster had not been distributed in the Unoha region, so they could enjoy their vacation peacefully. On the other hand, Iruka and Miacha secretly followed the horse-drawn carriage of Alan and Charlotte. Unexpectedly, the vacation was actually a plan by Iruka and Miacha to bring Alan and Charlotte closer together. After a long journey, Alan and Charlotte arrived at the Unoha Hotel, where the hotel staff, a mermaid, welcomed them as newlyweds on their honeymoon. Alan denied this until the staff showed him the vacation package, which was specifically for couples. Although Alan could have changed the vacation package, he decided not to because the couple's package offered the most luxurious services. This decision made Charlotte feel awkward. Shortly thereafter, Alan and Charlotte were directed to the public bathing facilities, where Charlotte had to wear a swimsuit that made it difficult for Alan to think clearly. Nevertheless, he he tried to remain calm so that they could both enjoy their vacation time. After enjoying the public bath services, Alan and Charlotte were surprised to find the room decorated for couples. At the same time, Iruka and Miacha, who were in the adjacent room, tried to eavesdrop on Alan and Charlotte. Shortly after, just before going to bed, Alan cast a spell that made everyone around him, including Iruka and Miacha, fall into a deep sleep. The next day, Alan took Charlotte to the zoo, which made her happy because she could play with the cute monsters there. To fulfill Charlotte's wish, Alan tried to tame some monsters at the zoo, not realizing that she was already playing with various monsters in the area. Seeing this, Alan thought that Charlotte had a talent for being a monster tamer, even for high-level monsters like Fenrir. At that moment, a zoo staff member came to ask for help from Alan and Charlotte, who were regarded as monster tamers, to deal with a rampaging Fenrir pup. Upon arriving at the cage, the zookeeper explained that they were having difficulty treating a wounded Fenrir pup named Lou because she kept rampaging. Apparently, Lou had become a target for illegal hunters and had been separated from her mother, making it hard to calm her down. After that, Alan tried to talk to Lou, but his efforts were in vain because she couldn't calm down, even though the mother Fenrir was on her way to the zoo to retrieve Lou. The zoo staff needed to treat the Fenrir pup's wounds before the mother arrived. Realizing that the rampage of the giant mother Fenrir could endanger the city's residents, Alan decided to confront the approaching mother Fenrir. Meanwhile, Charlotte asked Alan for permission to speak to the Fenrir pup because, for the first time, she wanted to do something for someone else. Knowing this, Alan agreed and left to intercept the mother Fenrir. Upon reaching the mountainous area, Alan tried to block the mother Fenrir from heading towards the city. During the battle, a monster capybara named Gosetsu, known as one of the strongest monsters, appeared and attacked Alan. Unexpectedly, Gosetsu intended to separate Charlotte from Alan, whom he believed had caused her to suffer by not avenging the kingdom that had exiled her. At that time, Gosetsu even incited the mother Fenrir to oppose Alan. Fortunately, Charlotte managed to calm Lou and brought her to the mother Fenrir, stopping the mother's rampage. On the other hand, Iruka and Miacha also succeeded in capturing the monster hunters in the area. Sometime later, Alan and Charlotte's vacation came to an end, and on the day of their departure, Lou approached Alan and Charlotte because she wanted to go with them. The mother Fenrir seemed unconcerned about her child's decision, especially since Alan's house was not far from the mother Fenrir's den. Therefore, Charlotte and Alan took Lou home. Additionally, Gosetsu suddenly decided to return to Alan's house, even though he hadn't given permission to the capybara monster. Gosetsu even considered himself part of Charlotte's family. As his house grew more crowded, Alan felt lonely because he spent less time with Charlotte. Nevertheless, he was happy to see Charlotte with a sense of purpose and more enthusiasm for her daily life. Alan also taught new magic to Charlotte, who wanted to improve her ability to communicate with monsters. With just one attempt, Charlotte mastered the magic, enabling her to understand Lou's language. As a celebration for Charlotte's success in mastering new magic, Alan deliberately built a special bath for her, but Gosetsu ended up using it first, prompting Alan to ask the capybara monster to leave the bath immediately. Quickly, Gosetsu used his technique and transformed into a human form. At that moment, Alan and Charlotte were shocked to see this because they hadn't expected Gosetsu to be able to transform into an adult woman. After finishing her bath, Charlotte thanked Alan for the gift, but he simply said that he could build a larger pool in the yard at that moment. Alan also told the story of how he first moved into the house, which had long been neglected. Alan admitted that he had never met the previous owner of his house, but according to rumors, the previous owner had suddenly disappeared without a trace. In the midst of their conversation, Alan and Charlotte were startled by mushrooms floating into the bath. Upon investigation, the mushrooms belonged to an elf named Dorothea, who lived in the basement. When Alan and Charlotte spoke with Dorothea, the elf confessed to being the previous owner of the house who had been declared missing. With the previous owner's appearance, Alan could no longer claim the house as entirely his. To continue living in the house, Alan was eventually forced to comply with Dorothea's requests. In her confession, Dorothea revealed that she was a novelist who had stopped writing for a long time due to a lack of ideas for her new work. For that reason, Dorothea had disappeared to search for inspiration until recently, when she got an idea for writing a romance novel. To make her writing appear more realistic, Dorothea asked Alan and Charlotte to serve as references for her novel by enacting some of the romantic scenes she had written. Although Alan initially refused, he eventually agreed to her request to retain ownership of his house. Not long after, Dorothea began directing Alan and Charlotte to perform romantic scenes according to her script. One of these scenes involved Alan catching Charlotte, who was falling from the upper floor. Unfortunately, Dorothea was not satisfied because Alan had deliberately used magic, so he wouldn't directly touch Charlotte. Dorothea then asked Alan and Charlotte to redo the scene. Hearing this, Alan said he didn't mind doing it again, but he emphasized that he refused to perform any scenes that violated norms. Dorothea agreed to Alan's request, and in the next scene, Alan and Charlotte were depicted as newlyweds. Unfortunately, Alan again received criticism from Dorothea for his stiff acting. In another scene, Alan became awkward when he got close to Charlotte, who was becoming increasingly captivating. Because of this, Alan's focus was disrupted, making it difficult for him to concentrate on his acting. A short while later, Dorothea instructed them to perform a new scene where Alan and Charlotte had to play school students. To support this scene, Gosetsu and Lou also participated, playing school bullies who would hinder Alan as he tried to rescue his beloved, Charlotte. As Alan got deeply into his role, during the final scene, he nearly confessed his feelings for Charlotte. In another scene, Alan and Charlotte played roles in a Cinderella story, where Charlotte was the princess exiled by her family. Alan was the prince who saved Charlotte. In the script written by Dorothea, Charlotte was a girl who often received mistreatment from her siblings. With the help of Lou as a fairy godmother, Charlotte had the chance to attend the ball and dance with the prince. After finishing the Cinderella scene, Dorothea praised Charlotte. Unfortunately, Alan did not receive much praise and was considered an amateur actor. Hearing this, Alan protested because he had also tried his best to showcase his acting skills. Not long after, Dorothea asked Alan and the others to perform the final scene in the Cinderella story. During the scene, Charlotte unexpectedly said lines that were not in the script, prompting Alan to consider confessing his feelings to her. Unfortunately, Alan didn't get the chance because a man claiming to be Dorothea's editor suddenly burst into Alan's house and took her away, saying he was going to punish her for neglecting her work for a very long time. Shortly after Dorothea's departure, Iruka suddenly appeared and delivered the news that Charlotte's younger sister, Natalia, was in trouble at the Magic Academy. Hearing this, Charlotte panicked because Natalia was the only family member who often helped her, unlike the other family members who always treated her like a servant. Without thinking twice, Alan and the others hurriedly set off for the Magic Academy using a sailboat. Upon arriving on the island, Iruka said she would explain the details of Natalia's troubles at her parents' house. Hearing this, Alan seemed somewhat reluctant about Iruka's idea because he had a major falling out with his father 3 years ago, and the incident was still the talk of the island. Nevertheless, Alan reluctantly agreed to follow Iruka's plan to help Charlotte's younger sister. Upon arriving at Iruka's parents' house, Harvey Crawford, who is Iruka's and Alan's father, warmly welcomed Charlotte. At that time, Iruka also introduced Charlotte as Alan's girlfriend, which made Alan feel awkward. Despite this, Alan, not wanting Harvey to bring up their past issues, decided to cooperate with Charlotte by pretending to be a couple. During the conversation, Harvey, who is the head of the Magic Academy, expressed his desire to pass on his job to Alan, but he had always refused, leading to frequent arguments between them. Shortly afterward, Alan's mother, Lisa Lott, came to greet them. Because of her youthful appearance, Charlotte initially thought that she was Alan's younger sister, prompting Lisa Lott to quickly introduce herself. Not wanting to waste time, Alan then inquired about Natalia, who was apparently causing trouble at the academy. Harvey suspected that Natalia had family issues, which led her to enroll at the Magic Academy to find solace. Unfortunately, after 3 months at the academy, Natalia had become a delinquent student who frequently disturbed others. Harvey then asked Alan to resolve Natalia's issues because he believed Alan understood the mindset of delinquent students, as Alan himself had been one in the past. That night, Alan and Charlotte were forced to sleep in the same room so that his parents wouldn't suspect that they were lying about their relationship. Alan then tried to use his magic to put Charlotte to sleep, but his magic didn't work in the house, so Charlotte, who wasn't sleepy, chatted with Alan for a bit before finally trying to sleep. The next day, Alan and Charlotte, who were disguised as new students, went to the academy and met Natalia and her group. At that moment, Natalia and the others seemed ready to fight until Alan introduced himself, causing Natalia's followers to be terrified because they realized Alan was the most respected person at the academy. Even so, Natalia didn't show any fear towards him and even ignored him when he said he was there to be her personal tutor. On another day, Alan and Charlotte approached Natalia in her class again. Unexpectedly, despite being known as a delinquent student, Natalia was quite smart and brave enough to correct the teacher when he gave wrong explanations. As an older sister, Charlotte couldn't hide her pride in Natalia. Seeing this, Alan pretended to ask Natalia to teach Charlotte about magic. Unaware that the girl in front of her was Charlotte, Natalia agreed. During lunchtime, a group of students led by Chris deliberately harassed Charlotte, the new student, by bumping into her and knocking her down. Alan, seeing this, became angry and almost used his magic to harm Chris and the others. Fortunately, Charlotte quickly stopped Alan using her magic. On another occasion, Alan took the initiative to spread the word that Natalia was learning magic from him. This way, no one would dare to harass Natalia anymore, except for her archenemy at the academy, Chris and his group, who also wanted to dominate the academy. To deal with this, Alan suggested that Natalia and Chris have a flag capturing competition in the dungeon to determine who was stronger. In that competition, Natalia emerged as the champion, but Chris, who didn't accept the defeat, challenged her to another match. That night, Natalia and the others were having dinner in the academy's cafeteria, where she seemed to be getting closer to Charlotte. Unfortunately, Alan didn't dare to discuss Charlotte's true identity in front of Natalia because he didn't want to see Natalia get angry like before. All Alan could do was continue building trust with Natalia, both with him and Charlotte. After having dinner together, Natalia fell sound asleep, so Alan and Charlotte had to take Natalia to her room. When they entered Natalia's room, Alan and Charlotte noticed a bag that seemed precious to her because it was sealed with magic so that no one else could open it. Seeing Natalia asleep, Charlotte was reminded of the times when she used to read picture books to her before she went to sleep. The next day, Natalia and Charlotte practiced magic together, and when they returned to the dormitory, Natalia was shocked to find that her precious bag was missing. From a note left on her desk, Natalia realized that Chris had stolen the bag, so she hurried to the forbidden dungeon where he was. Before leaving, Natalia asked Charlotte not to tell Alan about the issue. Meanwhile, Alan finally received news from his subordinates that Chris had challenged Natalia to go to the dangerous forbidden dungeon, so Alan rushed to find her. Inside the dungeon, Chris deliberately threw Natalia's bag into the dungeon's corridor, challenging her to retrieve it. Without thinking twice, Natalia and Chris raced to get the bag first. Unfortunately, they were chased by fierce monsters ready to attack them. Fortunately, Charlotte, who had secretly followed Natalia, quickly arrived and tried to fend off the monsters with her magic, though they eventually got trapped inside the dungeon. At that moment, Charlotte asked about the contents of Natalia's bag, which seemed very valuable. And Natalia told the story of her older sister, who was punished and expelled from the house, even though her older sister was completely innocent. Natalia admitted that she could not forgive her family for being so unfair to her older sister. So Natalia kept all of her sister's belongings in the bag to track down her older sister's whereabouts. Unfortunately, Natalia's tracking magic didn't work because someone else's magic was blocking it. Therefore, she assumed that her older sister was being held captive by someone. Hearing this explanation, Charlotte was moved, and even Chris was touched by her story, to the point of regretting his actions towards her. Just as Charlotte and the others were about to leave the dungeon, a giant salamander monster blocked their way. So Charlotte tried to distract the monster until she was struck by the monster's attack. Due to the attack, Charlotte fell, and her disguise was revealed, making Natalia realize that the person who had been close to her all this time was actually Charlotte, her older sister. Shortly afterward, Alan arrived at the dungeon and saved Charlotte by fighting the salamander monster with his magic, causing strong tremors throughout the island. After the attack, the salamander monster became tame because it turned out that the monster had been raised by Alan. With Charlotte's identity exposed, Alan allowed her to talk with Natalia. The two sisters finally hugged each other, exchanging their long-missed affection. Natalia then thanked Alan for saving Charlotte, but when she heard that he was dating Charlotte, Natalia seemed upset, especially after finding out that Alan had deliberately blocked her tracking magic. After all the problems were resolved, Alan and Charlotte went home. At that moment, they received a package from Miacha, which contained a magic circle. Once activated, Natalia suddenly appeared from within the magic circle. Additionally, Iruka, Miacha, and Dorothea then came to Alan's house, making the atmosphere even livelier. At the end of the anime, it shows Natalia and the others fast asleep after dinner. Alan then took advantage of the moment to invite Charlotte to stargaze in the yard while they were talking. Iruka and the others woke up and thought that Alan was getting romantic with Charlotte. Since no one was willing to listen to his explanation, Alan, frustrated, used his magic to deal with Iruka and the others. Moral lesson from the story: always confirm your travel plans, or you might end up honeymooning and adopting a talking capybara. Remember, vacation surprises are only fun when you're not the one getting surprised.